Welcome to Money, Manifestation, and Business, the podcast that shows you how to use your energy, intention, and consciousness to reprogram your money mindset, unleash a new level of possibility, and create a life and business that lights you up. I'm your host, Jamie Berman, and I invite you to join me each week for a dose of inspiration, coaching, and teachings to help you rewrite your money story, create abundance on your terms, and grow your business in a way that's fully aligned for you. This is going to be so much fun. Let's dive in. We are diving into part 2 of my interview with Josh Alexander. And in this episode, we dive deep into Josh's journey with mental health and OCD, and really the journey that he went on to heal it. And before we dive into the interview, I wanted to put a disclaimer out there. I want to let you know that the content of this episode is for informational purposes only and is really based on the personal experience of Josh. It is not intended as professional mental health advice or a substitute for therapy or medical treatment. So if you are struggling with OCD or mental health concerns, be sure to seek support from a licensed mental health professional. All right, we will dive into part 2. Welcome back, my friends, to part 2 of the episode with Josh Alexander, my husband, and we still have Millie here in our lap. We weren't able to get to the full interview last week because there's so much I wanted to cover with Josh. So we are back this week. We're going to talk about kind of the part 2 to your career because Josh has made a pivot. I call it a courageous pivot in his career over the past 5 years. And I'm so inspired by it. I know so many of you were following us along our Sweden journey as Josh was recently there writing for his album and recording. And so let's dive in. Let's talk about it. How the heck did you go from being a multi-platinum hit songwriter with many ASCAP awards, songs on the radio, really connections? Like you finally freaking made it. You were doing that for, I guess it was 15 years at that point.
Something like that.
Yeah. And
I started when I was 10.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, you kind of did, but as a professional, you were doing it for 15 years. And you decided there was something inside of you that said, maybe I want to do something else.
Yeah.
And I remember that being very scary at the time. I went through this whole transition, this whole journey with you.
You did.
So let's talk about that. What came up within you that made you maybe start questioning if that's what you wanted to do for the rest of your life, or maybe it was a calling for something else. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So, I think you kind of got to understand it from the context of like, I grew up from the time I was 5 or 6 studying classical music. So that was really my background. And, right around the time I got to be 10, 11, 12, pop music just flooded into my, everything. I remember listening to, Dr. Dre's The Chronic, and then the next page listening to Nirvana, and then listening to Mariah Carey, and then listening to Boyz II Men. It was just a complete hodgepodge of just, I thought, incredible music, and that really kind of took over my life. But my background really was in classical music, and I was very serious about it. And I entered into competitions. I won competitions as a classical pianist, and, ended up, getting into USC based on like a piano performance major.
And this was all through your, during elementary school and high school and all that?
Yeah, elementary, middle school, high school.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was like my background, and pop music really took over, and that just took off, and I met Billy. And
when you're young, I feel like pop music's just, I don't know. For me, it makes sense, right?
That's right. And I always kind of feel as it's interesting, like I was the age of the artists I was writing with.
Yeah.
So we were all like 20.
Yeah.
you know, I was literally going through the same kind of things that they were going through.
Right.
So an artist would walk in, you know, they were like, we were the same age and we
Yeah.
could so relate on these things. Right. And so I just felt like I was really tapped into the kind of stuff you talk about when you're 22,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And it was very easy to tap into that. And then, you know, I loved it and it was my whole world. And there got to be a time, you know, like you said, you know, and I had a number of hits with Billy and, you know, lived out so many amazing dreams. And I started to feel this little longing, this little itch, if you will. And I started to be like, you know, and it was like going into sessions, I was a little less excited to go into sessions. I started like on the weekend, you know, listening a ton to like contemporary classical music, started to listen a ton to film music, started really getting into composing. And I started to like take classes. I ended up enrolling at an amazing class at UCLA on composition and theory and harmony. And I started like, I just felt myself being like weirdly drawn like back to this stuff that I grew up studying. And I started like getting all these sounds and samples and, you know, writing like orchestral music, you know, like contemporary, like not like, you know, like Bach and Beethoven necessarily, but like modern, you know, classical music. And before I knew it, I was just like, oh my God, like, I think this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
But the big but with that is that from that thought of, I think I'm feeling this, like this feels like what's next to me, to actually taking action on that, there was a gap there.
Totally.
And it's for the reason you said. I felt like, I mean, my honest thought was like, I've got to be stupid to walk away from this.
Totally.
Like I really, you know this.
Oh, I
like,
remember we would be on walks in our neighborhood and you were like, we would have these conversations. Like,
100%.
yeah, totally.
And I remember thinking like, God, man, like I'm so fortunate. Like I've worked so hard, but I'm in this place that I feel like my younger self would have just dreamed of. And like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why would I stop doing this thing that I'm so really, really good at? And
that's the other thing is like other people were like, no way, you're amazing. I mean, because you are one of a kind whenever it comes to writing melodies and stuff.
I think I really, you know, had a level of mastery in it. And, you know, we're always getting better and there's, you know, a lot of incredible songwriters, but I really did feel like I had a really high level of skill with it. And it just felt weird. It's like, why am I not going to do this anymore? And I couldn't really explain it, but I just felt this like love. There was this deep desire to do this other thing. Yeah. And so that started percolating, and, you know, months went by, even years went by with this, and I was still songwriting, but like gradually that sort of excitement about it was just sort of starting to wane. And in any free time I had, I was studying contemporary classical music. I was studying, you know, film music. I was studying all this stuff, going back to my roots, you know. And fast forward, right, around the time the pandemic hit, all of a sudden you couldn't do any sessions. I mean, you could do remote stuff, but that wasn't really
everything shut down. Everything shut down. I don't even feel like people were doing remote.
I mean, there were people doing like Zoom sessions like that,
right.
but that really wasn't for me. And everything got still, as we all know, and I had nothing but time. And I was
for the first time in your life too.
For the first time in my life.
Because you have been doing music, acting, work. I mean, you've been doing this since you were a kid.
Yeah, it's true. So for the first time, like everything got still and quiet, and I actually could kind of more hear my own like inner desire and voice. And it became like so loud that it was like, oh shit, like I can't ignore this anymore. Like this is really like if you want to call it like a deep soul calling. And if I ignore this, it's going to be at my own peril. Like this is not good. And I feel like it's so funny, like earlier, I think in our last episode, I mentioned like, I always, like people would ask me like, I don't know, like, what's your, like, do you have any advice for someone, you know, people starting out and whatever? And I'd always be like, just go where the love is. Like, if you go where the love is, good things will happen. And I kind of felt like a little bit of a hypocrite. I'm like, here I am, and I'm feeling such love for this contemporary classical music, and I'm not going for it. Out of fear. You know, I just felt like, God, like, this is such a crazy thing to sort of pivot from this thing that's working so well. And I thought, like, I got to walk the walk. I got to actually do what I'm telling people. And ironically, that was also around the time where, like, you know, we talked about this off mic, but, you know, I'd always had a little bit of like perfectionist syndrome. And that's also related to, you know, like OCD, right?
Yeah.
Like obsessive compulsive. And on some level, it made me a great producer. It made me a great musician because I was able to like super zone in, like, you know, edit vocals for 10 hours a day.
Hyper focus. Yeah.
Hyper focus. You know, I've never had an issue doing that.
And being detail oriented.
Incredibly detail oriented. You know, practicing a riff for 2 hours straight, whatever I needed to do, you know? But the shadow side of that is way over obsessing over things.
Yeah.
And, you know, not just music, but other things, you know, in life that cause a lot of suffering. And so I think, ironically, right around that time when I was like, oh, damn, I got to go where the love is. I got to do this.
Yeah.
The OCD, which always was very manageable. It was just like very like in the background, kind of like, you know, it was annoying, but it was like not a big deal. Got really bad. And, you know, I think it was a function of the world basically stopped for everyone.
Yeah.
And, you know, we had all this time in our hands and all those little like sort of obsessive kind of things got really, really out of control.
Yeah.
And I never had any support around it. I was always just, you know, kind of on my own and it was fine. But it got really, really intense to the point where it became not really sustainable to keep going the way I was going. There was a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And both of those things were so weird because on one level, there was this huge amount of love and creative energy for contemporary classical music that I was like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there was this like really intense like suffering and pain that I was going through because OCD was getting so bad. And you were so inspirational to me, Jamie, you know, being a coach. And I was like very resistant to getting help because I just like, I don't know if it's like a guy thing or whatever, but
It's vulnerable. Yeah.
It's vulnerable.
If you've never had support before, you've never talked about these
100%.
things, it's vulnerable.
It's very vulnerable. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, I've never, you know, been to a therapist. And I was just like, it was just so scary.
Yeah.
But you were so helpful for me and you really found this incredible person that ended up being my coach that was able to, who specializes in this, in OCD, and was able to like tell me like within a phone call, like, oh yeah, this is just OCD. And it was like, she was so normal about it. And she was so great, Allie Grayman, who's just,
we'll put a plug in. We'll put her info in the show notes just because if this is something you struggle with, she basically, along with the work Josh did, has been such a
Allie's a gem of a human being. And so I think kind of genius at what she teaches.
Well, and because, I mean, the other thing is like, I, even as a coach, and I have an extensive background in coaching, and I studied spiritual psychology, and we studied a lot of different psychological approaches and ways of working with people and holding space. And with Josh, he was stumping me. Like, I didn't know. Normally, I can help anyone work through things. And, you know, I would normally totally like be able to hold space for you, help you. But what he was going through, I was just like, the way that I normally coach is not working. Right. And I felt stumped. So of course I'm the type of person when I can't figure something out, I'm like all in on studying and trying to figure it out. I'm like, are you going through a dark night of the soul? What is this? And I think we kind of together.
And I just want to say that's, I think one of the absolute brilliant gifts of you is that you, I think in a similar way, you won't stop until you get an answer to something. And really Jamie was the person that found Allie and was able to be like, I think you might have, I didn't even know I had OCD.
Yeah, I know.
And you were like, I think you might have OCD. I was like, what? I'm like, what? And then I started reading about it. I'm like, oh my God, that's what it is. And it was like the biggest relief in the world. And, you know, you finally understand. It's like anything. You go, oh my God, that's what this is. And very quickly, you know, after working with Allie, it started to get better. And ironically, also around this time, I think, you know, the pandemic, everything stopped. I got super into back, you know, a decade later, or whatever it was from like the first episode, into meditation again. And this was around the time I got super deep. I was doing meditation retreats all over the country, going for 7 days at a time, meditating for, you know, silent meditation.
Well, actually, this was right before.
You're right.
You had the kind of OCD attack, because I think that probably You know how they say whenever you start meditating, be careful because
That's it,
all the
man.
gunk rises. And I am positive that had to do with, it's like
100%.
sometimes it has to get much worse before it gets better. And I see this happening a lot, is that stuff that's been inside, that's just been annoying, but
Yep.
like we've been able to manage it or push it down. When we start going deep or set intentions for big, powerful things in our lives,
That's
it's like this stuff that's in the way of that has to be cleared. Hey there, I don't want to interrupt your episode, but I promise it is for good reason. I wanted to hop in here and let you know about a special event that I have coming up called Manifest. It's a 5-day money manifestation challenge that is completely free that I'm offering to my entire community. It's on October 21st through 25th, and it's going to be packed with incredible teachings, great content, and things that are going to help you really get started on your manifestation journey. So come join us for these potent 5 days of teaching and let's manifest together. Whether you want to manifest your first 5K week, or you want to manifest a 100K launch, or your first 7-figure year. It really doesn't matter because these teachings will apply to you. It's all about energetically aligning yourself with that which you desire. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. So be sure to go to manifest.jamieberman.com to sign up. We will also have the link in the show notes. I cannot wait to see you there.
100. Pema has a great metaphor where she says, most of us, it's like our lives or our inner consciousness is like a swirling kind of whirlpool.
Yeah.
We don't know what's in there. It's just
especially when we're busy, right? It's just like,
exactly.
okay, we're just swirling along with the junk,
So
and we're used to it. Yeah.
So it's all swirling around. And all of a sudden with meditation, everything stops.
Yeah.
And that was also the pandemic. Everything stops. So all of a sudden, all that swirling stops and you're able to look into clear water.
Yeah.
And you go, oh shit.
Yeah.
This is not what I want. This is actually not my highest self. And so all that to say, I was having kind of big openings, I think, through meditation and my spirituality. You had turned me on to manifestation very soon after that. The pandemic happened. OCD got really bad. And at the same time, I had discovered I'm going to follow this love that I feel now for contemporary classical music.
Yeah.
And all this was happening simultaneously. And it was, the most challenging part of my life, bar none, like not even close. And also I can look back now and it sounds like such a cliche. It was one of the best times of my life. And I know hands down, I wish what I went through, I wouldn't wish that, as they say, on my worst enemy. And at the same time, I can't not see it ultimately as a blessing because from that, now I feel more aligned, more at home in my being, more authentically myself than I think I ever could have imagined. And through all that work I did, I was able to really go all in on myself as an artist. And once I started doing it, it was like I made that first record while I was healing OCD, and it was tough. I mean, every day I'd get in there and it was like the music was one of the things that kind of saved me. It was like, at least I had this album to make, and I didn't have any label. I didn't know what, I'm making a record. I had my upright, put some mics on it, and I'm making a freaking record. And, ended up signing to a great label. And, we got that record out and, it got heard by, a good amount of people.
You want to say the name of the record?
Well, my first record was called Hymns for Troubled Times, which was ironic because it was a troubled time for me. It was a troubled time for the world. And I kind of made it for myself, but I also started to see like, God,
during the pandemic.
This is probably going to have a beneficial impact on maybe a couple people. And it was great. I mean, it ended up really kind of connecting to a lot of people. But once I went all in on it, it was like that surge of electricity that I felt when I was 19 writing pop songs was back. And again, it's like I just knew it.
Yeah.
I was like, this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah.
And I started following that, and like I couldn't write fast enough. Like ideas just started pouring out.
Yeah.
And you know, if for the pop stuff, you know, I still loved it, but it was waning a little bit. And this, it felt like I literally felt like I was a kid again.
Yeah.
And I just knew, I'm like, this is what's next.
Yeah.
And I think that the healing of the OCD allowed me the brain space, because what I didn't realize like my whole life was that those sort of obsessive things, and it's basically, you know, it's sort of like anxiety where it's like worry, but it's just about everything, and it's like taken to a really high level.
Yeah.
So it's like anything that could go wrong, like OCD, like you can sort of spiral out about it.
Yeah.
And what I realized in working with it and healing it was that all of a sudden my brain was so free and so uncluttered with all these ridiculous fears about things that might happen or could happen.
Yeah.
That I had so much more space, and I started putting all that into music.
Right.
And I would get into the studio and I would just be clear.
Right.
And so not only was I doing something I loved, but my brain was free of clutter. And I just felt like I was able to create at a speed that I've never done before.
Yeah.
And now, like when I get in there, I feel like actually more productive and tapped in than I've ever felt in my life. Because not only am I doing something I love, which I love songwriting, you know, I still have love for songwriting, but I love what I'm doing now, but I'm also so much freer in my creativity now, because I addressed this kind of thorn in my side that was robbing me of that stillness for so long. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was incredible to witness that journey, because you talk about it now and it's like, it feels like a small, not small, but it was an undertaking. It was a huge thing. I'd never seen Josh go through anything like that. I felt like he wasn't even himself anymore. And it was really challenging. And you had so much courage and so much dedication to healing it. I mean, I've never seen someone that dedicated to healing something. Like, it was incredible. So I just so we can touch on it a little bit, because I feel like maybe there is someone out there that's struggling with OCD that also doesn't realize it, because I always thought OCD was like, people with OCD clean a lot, which is not Josh.
Excuse me?
That's not how his manifests.
Excuse me? No, okay.
No, but like I thought it was that, or I thought it was like patterns, or they did rituals. So like that's why we couldn't see it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how... tell me a little bit more about OCD.
I don't want to come on and act as if I'm an expert. You know, I had it, and, you know, I know what works for me. And again, so I don't want to speak from that place, but I will say I have a deep understanding of it now on the other side. And what I would say is, basically, you can have OCD about anything. And it's just sort of like anxiety, but taken to a really high level. And so you can have any sort of theme. So if you hear about it in popular culture a lot around like obsessive, like, you know, washing your hands. And I had that a little bit.
Or health things. Do I have cancer? What is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cleanliness, feeling like, you know, germs. That's one theme. You can have it around, you know, there's a lot of like relationship OCD, where people are constantly worried their partner's going to leave them, or they're constantly worried that they're going to get cheated on, or even that they're going to, you know, they're going to leave their partner. It's just sort of these nightmare scenarios. Yeah. Or, you know, what if I get in my car and I drive off the road? You know, it's like it's just anything that's sort of like that. But as opposed to, you know, most of us, where we have any thoughts, you know, we have 60,000 thoughts a day or something like that. And most of us, we have these thoughts, they come in and we just go, oh, whatever, you know, we kind of like that. So people with OCD, they sort of spin out about it. And then they start to go, oh my God, like, and they start to like go down that road, and they tend to have very vivid imaginations, and they start and all these things are honestly amazing things for creativity. And so you actually do find it's interesting that people in the creative arts, I don't want to throw out any numbers. I don't know if it's more than other things, but I know a lot of people in the creativity that have that sort of obsessive, slightly OCD thing. Yeah. And I think there's an imaginative nature to people that have it that actually really suits the creative arts.
Right.
But the shadow side is that it can drive you nuts. So
yes. And it can be about things that really like your conscious mind knows that you don't need to worry about, but it can't stop, right?
Of course. And even, for some people it manifests as like, you've seen this sometimes in movies where, these ridiculous things where, and not ridiculous when you're going through it, obviously, but, illogical sort of magical thinking, the idea, the classic thing, you shouldn't step on a line on a street corner. You're going to get bad luck.
Right.
People with OCD tend to take that and then they take it really far. So you could see someone that literally will not step on cracks in the pavement because they really think something bad's going to happen to them. So it's all this stuff, and it can be very ordinary too. Like just thinking that, there's a million.
Totally.
Anything and everything.
Did I send an email and I don't remember? Right. That was one thing that you used to like.
It's anything and everything.
You
know. And I think it manifests. I think it manifests differently for everyone. But the point is, it's not real.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things, and it's interesting because it goes back kind of to our first conversation from the other day, where it's like, what you focus on grows.
Yeah.
So if you're focused on how is this for me, if you're focused on trying to think of the best case scenario, that tends to be what you see. And I think in some really interesting level, I don't know if we've even talked about this like that, having OCD is like the ultimate test case in what you focus on grows.
Totally.
Because when you're thinking all those like scary, anxiety-prone thoughts, even if you don't literally bring them into your life, you're living a reality in which they are a part of your life. Because you're experiencing them in your subconscious, internally. Even if nothing ever happens, you don't get sick.
Well, it's just like, that's what I talk about. Worry is like the opposite of conscious manifestation, because you're literally focusing on what you don't want.
100%.
And it's the same thing, because OCD is like worry on steroids or something,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. So it was like, I had this masterclass in that you get more of what you focus on.
Yeah.
And so here I was, I was no fault of my own. I didn't understand it, but I was focusing on all these like, oh man, like scary things. And that's what I was experiencing in my reality.
Yeah.
Not literally, but in my life, in my consciousness.
Yes.
And the moment I understood it, the moment through working with an incredible coach, through doing my own work, through meditation, through spirituality, through all that, the moment I started realizing that I could flip that.
Yeah.
And just like I could think of all these worst case scenarios, I could think of all these best case scenarios. So I remember like going on walks where I literally felt like every thought that was coming in was some ridiculous kind of nightmare. And I just flipped it. I literally felt like I was like a flipper, not of houses, but of thoughts.
I love it.
Right? I was a house flipper for thoughts. And every single thought that would come in, I was like, no, it's going to be great. Oh, what if it? No, it's going to be amazing. Oh God, what if it? No, it's going to be good. It was just constant. And I just, did this hour after hour, day after day, month after month. And before I knew it, you fast forward a year, 2 years, it was like, it just dawned on me one day. I think we were on a walk or something. And I was like, I don't have any thoughts in my head.
Oh my God.
It was like, it was just space.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'd ever had that in my entire life.
Wow.
I've always had a very active mind, thoughts, ideas, imagination. And for the first time through all that training and sort of re-educating myself and all that sort of,
reprogramming your brain, literally.
Reprogramming, 100%. Doing those things, doing meditation, doing all this stuff, focusing on something I loved. Like
and the
music.
disregarding too. You did a lot of that.
Huge. Yeah. So one approach is to sort of, flip the thought, think of something else. Another approach like that Ali is really amazing at is just simply disregarding it. And she talks about it as if it's like, imagine you're in an apartment and right next door to you is another apartment with very paper thin walls. And let's say there's a parrot.
Yeah.
In the other room. And the parrot's saying all kinds of crazy stuff like, you're an idiot. You're a moron. All this kind of stuff, right? Eventually, like, if you wanted to keep your sanity, you just ignore it.
Yeah.
You'd be like, this parrot's ridiculous. It's just trained and heard someone say this.
I know.
I don't care what this parrot says.
Yeah.
Who would care?
Yeah.
And that's what you have to be like with OCD. So it's even like, you know, it can also happen in like, you know, if you're like, let's say you're writing a paper and you have this sort of obsessive feeling, you have to keep rereading the paper. You're afraid you made a typo. It's really wild the way it manifests.
Yeah.
You have to keep rereading it. Oh God, you know, it's a big paper. What if I made a typo? You keep rereading it. So it's like, it's not just like rereading it 2 times. It's like rereading it 10 times, you know?
Well, I remember.
Right? So what you start to have to do is you have to realize that voice that's saying, I need to reread it for the 10th or 15th time. You got to think of it as like that parrot in there. You just disregard it.
Yeah.
You just don't.
And you feel the anxiety too. That's the other part, right?
You have to be okay with it feeling like it's not okay.
Yeah.
And you have to be okay with it feeling like this feels really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think also to tie into, I think, a little bit like manifestation, I see so many parallels the way you heal that with like consciously creating the life that you dream of.
Yeah.
Because so often, as you know better than anybody,
Absolutely.
teaching this, which you're so brilliant at, like you are not seeing in reality what you're wanting to create. And so on some level, just like with OCD, you disregard the thoughts you don't want.
Yeah.
Or you don't care to think about. I think with manifestation on some level, you have to disregard the present reality you're seeing in favor of the vision you're holding.
Yes.
So here you are, you know where you want to go, you know what you want to create. You're so inspired to do that. And what you see is not that. So on some level, just like a thought that comes in that you don't care to think about, you have to literally disregard what is visually in front of you and hold the vision in your mind.
Yeah.
Until you see that outpictured in 3D reality.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like, and I talk about this with my coach all the time, I was like, it's such an amazing training for, I feel like, consciously creating and manifesting and creating the life you want, because you literally become kind of like a Jedi master in like, you know, disregarding the things you don't want and focusing on the things you do want.
Yeah.
And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, like that's kind of what you do when you manifest.
100%. Totally. 100%. And I think through you healing OCD and me witnessing that and learning how that OCD brain works, it's like there's so many parallels. I mean, it's OCD is just a little bit, it's like it's on overdrive, but I think we all have that to some extent where we worry about things that it's repetitive, it's habitual.
Totally.
You know, I know a lot of my clients, when they initially come in, tend to worry about money, have that of visualizing what the worst case scenario, what if I run out of money, what if it doesn't work, all of that kind of stuff. And it's been really a gift to me too of witnessing you go through this, because it's taught me so much about how you really can reprogram the brain, you know, and you can really disregard those things. You can call them out as these are habitual thoughts, and I'm going to practice letting them go, you know, and it's not easy to do. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes consciousness.
Yeah.
But it absolutely can be done. I mean, look at you're a total testament to that you can totally do that.
And I think that was the thing that made it the hardest for me, was that before, you know, the OCD thing got really bad, like I was such a positive person. So that made it even harder for me, because it was like, this is so not me. Like thinking of all these kind of ridiculous nightmare scenarios, like it just felt so, like, to put it funny, off brand.
Yeah.
It like wasn't me. Like what the hell is going on? So it made it even more, I think, upsetting for me. Yeah. And so I think ultimately it taught me, just like you said, Jamie, like the pliability of our mind, the plastic nature of it. It can bend. Those people talk about, you know, neural pathways. You literally can create new neural pathways. And like, man, I can't even articulate, like, to go from thinking, you know, for that period in the beginning of the pandemic, everything was wrong, to focusing on how everything was here to teach me something. Yeah. Everything was working for my good. You know, the universe is actually friendly. Yeah. And is, you know, conspiring on my behalf to the degree that I can believe in it myself. Yeah. You know, there is a real partnership going on there. And that there is something, and we don't have to get necessarily into the mechanics of it, you know, because I think everyone thinks about it differently, but that there is something that really does respond to our belief and to our thinking and to our our unconscious knowing, and it tends to outpicture what we focus on most in reality. And that, it's hard to understand it, but there seems to be this thing that really does exist that tends to create what we believe.
Yes.
And so I think, it really taught me how you can recreate those neural pathways, and by living affirmatively. And actually if you really distill it for me, it's just focus on what you want and don't focus on what you don't.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my God, I'm running out of money. Okay, now there's realities.
Yeah.
You got to pay your bills. You got these, you can't, no one's saying you overlook that, of course. But as much as you can, focus on what you want and don't focus on what you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an obvious oversimplification, but I think on some level, that's really what I learned from all that.
So I think I know the answer to this, but do you feel like going through that journey has helped you with your manifestation process and your ability to create
God. 100%. First of all, my mind is more still than it's ever been in my life. So I actually have space to focus on what I want to create.
Yeah.
I've seen, it's funny, I had an amazing teacher named Adi Ashanti. He was this incredible meditation teacher. And he used to say, and it really kind of weirded me out when he said it, but now I see it so clearly. And he said, it's all here. And it's each of our job to choose what we want to create. Everything is here. And you can go to the height of joy and bliss, or you can go to the height of depression and anger and resentment, and it's all here.
Yeah.
It's all available. And on some level, when you get still enough, you can see those things in yourself. You see all the potentialities.
Yeah.
And you realize it's a choice.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what it taught me. And he was talking about it from a meditation and spiritual context, but it was exactly the insight I had going through it. It was what do you want? And of course, we all come in with different, curriculum and life situations. And man, I've had it pretty great. And the background that I've had and the stability I had growing up, is an absolute blessing and a privilege. But I will say, that period for me was deeply intense.
Yeah.
And I really did see it really comes down to what do you want? What do you want to focus on?
Yeah.
What do you want to create?
Yeah.
And at this point in my life, I just don't have a lot of time for focusing on anything I don't want to create. This is it.
Yeah. All right, my friends, we are going to wrap up part 2 of the episode right there. But make sure to tune in next week for part 3 with Josh, where he talks about this courageous pivot that he made in his music career and how healing OCD really helped him with his manifestation process and how he brought that into creating the next evolution of his career as a neoclassical composer. So I can't wait to see you next week for part 3. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope this episode is something that you'll be able to add to your manifestation toolbox to come back to when you need a little extra motivation. If you like what you've heard today and want to take it deeper, you've got to come check out my signature coaching program, the Money Manifestation Movement. It's the place where you'll not only learn manifestation, but you'll begin to live it alongside me and an amazing community of like-minded entrepreneurs doing this work together. Head on over to jamieberman.com to learn more.